Welcome to Coleman Report Live. I'm Bob Coleman. We're talking Main Street and the small business lenders that help it grow. John Riosti, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us on July 1st.
That's right.
We're not dog days of summer yet, but we're hitting summer. So, Lance, good to see you as always.
Good to be here.
I was reminiscing last year about our, I kept saying the world, every day we got new news, the world was going mad. And it's not every day now, but what, every other day, John?
Could be.
I still like that picture of you. That's good. Hey, we got a bunch of cool poll questions. Let's go to number one. Have you funded an SBA loan under the temporary 450C guidance? That guidance allows you to fund a loan without receiving the transcript. Lance, what is your best practice? Would you recommend that, or do we fund
well,
it? Well,
lenders do a variety of things. Some lenders will not underwrite the loan until they get the transcripts back. The SOP has always allowed delegated lenders to go ahead and, I mean, you don't have to hold up underwriting, but it's always said you had to get the transcripts back and reconciled before closing. The new guidance allows you to go ahead and disperse, and I suspect most lenders probably will use that at times. But Bob, I love to get the transcripts back, review them, and just make sure there's no issues before I file.
It's worst case scenario. We get the transcripts back, and it's not suspected fraud. It is fraud. What do we do?
Well, you're going to, like any other fraud related to the SBA program, you're going to report it to the SBA Inspector General. Now, having been in the business for a while and having reviewed quite a number of transcripts, Bob, it's very seldom that you get something out of the ordinary. Occasionally.
Yeah, if you get to the point where the person is signing on the dotted line, usually a good BDO will say, now, you have to sign this form, and this is what it says. So are you sure you want to go through with this?
Yep.
Number two, on average, it is taking the IRS how long to process 4506 forms for your institution? Lance, what do you think the vote's going to come in at?
This is a tough one, Bob. If you have good, the IRS has never really been slow.
All over the board.
Yeah. They've never really been slow, Bob. They've just been incredibly particular about how the form is completed. A best practice when the 4506C or T or whatever you're filling out is to take the most recent tax return and make sure the information on the 4506 matches up with what's on the most recent tax return. You can have a one-digit glitch in the address, a one-letter issue with the name or the street, and it'll reject it. So they've always been reasonably efficient at getting these transcripts back, and some people would have to correct me because I've kind of been, well, not for long, but for 2 months, I'm just servicing, just liquidation. But I think the biggest issue I experienced in my practice was getting the form filled out correctly initially. We get it completed, borrower signature, send it in, and it get rejected. So we'd have to correct something and send it in again.
The reason why we're asking this question is that the SBA came out with a notice today extending this through September 30th. This had expired yesterday, and SBA gives you 6 months to reconcile it. Lance, I don't think you should take 6 months, but they do give you
the problem with it, Bob, is what are you going to do if you have a problem in 6 months? I mean, I know. So
do it right.
I think best practice, Bob, if at all, you know, unless they're just incredibly compelling reasons to close and fund without the transcripts, I still would follow the process of again, I don't think you should ever hold up underwriting for that, but I like to have the transcripts before I close.
Yeah, and that's something that in your process, don't wait until it goes to the underwriter to start ordering these. Closing. Underwriters should do it. It should be done immediately. That's
absolutely.
That and life insurance, if they need it, should be started. John, I'm going to ask you a macro question. How many less employees are there today than prior to COVID-19?
I'm going to
guess. What are you going to vote?
That it's in that 5 to 10 million range.
All right, let's do whatever.
I believe it's still over 10 million, but it's a good question, and I'm guessing.
And you guessed right. The answer is 7 million. So, yeah, and that's and the reason why I asked this question, I think we need to keep things in perspective now. This next chart's just going to blow you away. This is from ADP, from their June payroll source. Look at this chart. You have that, Mike? One more, Michael. There we go. I mean, in compare, it's just huge, John.
I'm reminded of an EKG chart. It looks like a heart attack there, something like that.
And they came back.
I think the thing is crazy about that is the unemployment rate pre-PPP, or at the beginning, you know, was incredible, and then it just immediately, once the money started going out, bounced.
Yeah. But I think a lot of that, I think you need to credit PPP for having that come back. The point is we're still short, but that's an amazing looking chart. If you want to get that, you can Google it. It's ADP, usually has pretty good information. Lance, this one's for you. We have an Alabama company. They got a $10 million PPP loan. Then they closed a couple months later. They fired everyone in the factory, and they moved their operations to Mexico. It was a 120-year-old company. That was our last American production facility. If you're the loan officer on this one, what are you going to do?
I am going to, well, they closed the business.
No, they didn't close the business. They closed the operation. They moved all production to Mexico.
Yeah, this is kind of from a PPP lender's perspective. I assume there was no forgiveness application.
I don't know.
I'm going to assume there was no forgiveness application since they packed up, and maybe there will be, and hopefully so, and hopefully it could get approved. But let's just take the tack that there's no forgiveness application.
Well, look at that last sentence. Mr. Meyer, the CEO, said in an email that he had not intended to shutter the plant, but the money allowed the company to keep the workers on the job through most of 2020. So I think that he's setting up for forgiveness. I
got to be honest with you. It's sounding like he could apply for and receive forgiveness with the appropriate documentation, because I'm assuming because of the size of it, this was an early round 2020 PPP loan. But two things are in play. A, you hope he is able to submit for forgiveness, provide the appropriate documentation, and get forgiven. If they're not, I would just generate a servicing memorandum to stick in my file, describing what happened, and I assume the entity's still there.
Yeah, the entity's still there, and this is from the National Law Journal, just FYI. So this is a legal one.
So the business did not close. Okay, Bob. Let's say you file bankruptcy. You're going to file a proof of claim, and then when SBA reveals what the purchase demand process is on PPP, you're going to file for purchase demand. Let's say the business is closed. If the business is closed, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to write a memo, stick it in the file, And if they don't file for forgiveness, you're going to submit whatever, when SBA releases the purchase demand process, a purchase demand package. This one is rather confusing, Bob, because it sounds like he could actually apply for forgiveness. So, and probably because he kept his workers in place through 2020, and then it sounds like in 2021 he packed up and went to Mexico. Maybe he likes cervezas and warmer temperatures. I don't know. But
lower labor costs is what he
it
likes.
sounds like he could still apply for forgiveness, Bob. So if I were working this project, I would reach out to the borrower and strongly encourage him to collect the forgiveness documents and submit for forgiveness. But let's say he doesn't. Then you're going to collect payments. If he gets 60 days, past due, you're going to submit for purchase demand from SBA.
Lance, hang up your phone. Put it on mute.
Sorry,
Okay, couple questions. I love Russell's question. Russell, they're always provocative. They're always insightful. The real question is, can you use PP funds to pay Mexican workers for a U.S. operation?
No. Yeah.
Very good. Jim says, due to employment issues, a potential borrower is seeking 504 funding for automation, which will eliminate the need for employees. Any thought of the jobs? How does that impact the job requirement for 504? Can we argue that retention, that all jobs are in jeopardy if they can't meet demand?
Hey, you're going to have to talk to the CDC on that one. I mean, that's kind of, because 504 loans have a job creation requirement. There are some workarounds in some circumstances, but I'm going to encourage you to reach out to the CDC that you work for and see if you can meet that requirement.
John, the restaurant revitalization fund, more and more read about that is a mess. Are you following this at all? Or do you have any opinions on what's happening?
Well, I agree it's a mess. I'm following it, but because it's a direct program, we're not following it as close. But sort of a second through a second degree or a second layer, since a lot of the restaurants that are getting the grants are bank clients, so money's fungible. Right. It's supporting their operations, but it, the one thing that impresses me, not impresses is the wrong word, I think, because I'm not impressed. Nobody's impressed by the program, but it's all of the grant programs seem to be operating much less efficiently than PPP. Right. And they're much smaller.
Right. And we've talked about that. It's the PPP, in my opinion, the rewards, but it worked. We had a great public-private partnership. The banks came through and they took care of Main Street. And for some reason, someone said, no, we don't want the banks to make any money off this one. And that one, it shuttered venue. There's all sorts of hiccups where they're trying to do it themselves.
Well, in the case of PPP, SBA basically employed most of the banks in America and a lot of the bank staff. And the only way you could have possibly done that program in the time frame it was done is with that level of help. So, I don't know how they could have restaurant revitalization. Maybe they could have used CDFIs. Maybe they could, but they could have used some help.
Well, this is July. This was done a minimum of a year ago.
One other thing, Bob, that just occurred to me while Lance was talking, he's right. They did essentially, temporarily sort of nationalize the banking industry to run that program, but they also nationalized the banking industry's technology. And maybe that is the missing component between restaurant revitalization, shuttered venue, and compare it to PPP is now they're relying on their own technological infrastructure.
Well, and like John was talking about, Bob, most participant banks, they're companies that maybe were doing well that have exploded because they have platforms for PPP origination and forgiveness. I mean, that's an industry now.
Yes.
And so a lot of what made PPP work was, all the various platforms that were used by banks that banks spent harder, money on to get the product out.
John, would you say it's a fair statement that anybody who qualified for a PPP loan and wanted one was able to obtain funding? Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And you contrast that with this from the NRA, National Restaurant Association, says 1/3 of the restaurants got the money and 2/3 didn't. Well, if we put those numbers on PPP, those employment numbers that we were talking about would be significantly different than $7 million people, that's for sure. John, what are you working on these days? What's fun for you?
Well, one thing that we were working on that I learned just made it online as we started this program was we did a brief article about the two most recent PPP loan sales. Both of them occurred this week, involving Trustmark in Mississippi, involving Dime Community in New York, Long Island, and Brooklyn. And that was just under, when you combine the 2021 originations, that they, more importantly, I guess, or the end of last week, and you probably have talked about this, Bob, but at the end of last week, the Fed announced that it was going to extend the PPP loan facility for a month through July. So now that there's another month for banks to weigh whether they want this or not. The hassle, I guess.
John, yeah, and give me a 101, 2 questions. Why would you sell and why would you buy?
2 reasons for selling, and both of these banks mentioned them, obviously independently of each other, so I thought that was interesting, but they hit upon the 2 same reasons. One, it frees up your staff.
Yeah.
Because they're no longer servicing, and they're no longer, working on forgiveness. All of the loans are now somebody else's problem. So there's that. And then there is the earlier recognition of fee income. For these 2 banks, since both of the sales took place before June 30th, they were able to recognize that income in second quarter earnings. So I wish I could remember exactly how much for each bank, but it's roughly, one was a little bit under 20 million, and one was a little bit over, but let's say roughly $20 million for each. That's a significant benefit.
Yeah.
Now,
absolutely. Do you know if these
portfolios would be third quarter, but that's still, it'll still
do you know
help.
these portfolios sold at par, premium, discount? Do you know the specific transactions?
They probably had to pay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Go ahead, Lance.
Bob was asking if they sold at par or did they have to pay a premium to sell it?
Or, yeah.
I think they're slightly less than par, but not much.
Okay.
Because
A little bit of a haircut.
a little bit of benefit for the buyer. But mainly the buyer, what they see, what the loan source has said to me is they have invested heavily in the technology of their servicing, the technology for servicing. So, they're obtaining forgiveness and they're just servicing the loans in a way that's efficient enough where they can make money even with the very low rate of interest. So the little bit of premium that they may be getting, because I'm not privy to the contracts. I'm guessing,
But yeah,
we should make sure that people understand that. And number 2, that very small 1% interest rate is still enough because of volume for them to make money.
Yeah, and John hit a critical point there. if you had enough volume, 1%, the numbers are staggering in some cases.
Yes.
Russell makes an interesting comment. He said, even if it's sold, if it's the consumer, a problematic loan could still be your problem, which is interesting. Sandy says, what have you heard about SBA working directly with the borrower on PPP loan forgiveness for loans under 150, Lance?
I can't answer that question, Bob. I'm
Do you
sorry.
know the answer?
I do know the answer, but I can't answer.
You were confident in your statement. Changing horses. Lance, do you have any guidance for the requirement of lenders needing a liquor license for obviously liquor-based business, but the loan being used for inventory to start the business, but the borrower has not been able to get the license from the state until they're ready to open? What comes first, the money or the licensing?
Well, how did they get the liquor if they didn't have a license?
Well, they haven't yet. They haven't.
Yeah, I don't think a bank's going to get a liquor license. I had a lesson on this, Bob, during the last recession. During the last recession, I was liquidating banks with SBA portfolios, and we shut down a liquor store in a different state. And we went up, and there was a ton of inventory, and we had one of those, not a Sprinter van, but similar. So I called the receiver in charge, and I'm like, what do you want me to do with all this alcohol? He said, put it in the van and bring it back to the warehouse. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm going to haul $50,000 worth of alcohol across the state line. No, sir, not doing it.
Smoking the Bandit.
But, yeah, if they're underwriting a loan, I wouldn't close the loan without the liquor. I mean, that would have been a condition of the loan closing, is have liquor license in place before you close it.
Very good. Thanks, Les. Hey, we got some more questions, and we'll answer those tomorrow. I've been notified by my internet provider. In fact, we had all sorts of problems yesterday that we may be down tomorrow. So Lance, I plan on being here, but Lance has agreed to step in if I go off the grid. And we'll hold over I'm going to talk about the PPP questionnaire tomorrow, Lance. We'll do that. And of course, Lance's the loan closing course is doing very well. Lance, I know you're excited about that. We're putting the finishing touches on it. John, thank you very much for your time. I know you're busy, and I appreciate it. Thank you for coming. And thank you all for joining us today for Coleman Report Live and for supporting America's Main Street. One entrepreneur at a time.
Have a great day.